Welcome back to another episode of the Prep Extra Podcast. I'm Colton Stone alongside, as always, Chris Basnett, wrapping up another week of prep sports. You go outside, Chris. It's the crisp fall air. It smells like playoff football, and that's because we finally have made it to playoff football.
Here.
And the last week of the regular season, of course, for 11-man and 6-man football, but 8-man football is ramping up. We made it here.
We survived.
We made it here.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where it was real before, but this is where it gets really interesting. Everything is quite literally one game at a time.
Yeah, it's 32 teams in D1 and D2 make the playoffs. It's the format I really like. They kind of divide that first round up east and west, 16 teams each, and then you take those winners, those 16 winners, reseed it, play statewide. And I think you look at both D1 and D2, and I think they're both pretty there's teams that you look at that are favorites, I think, in both classes. But at the same time, I think you're going to see two pretty wide open classes as well. You look at D1, just to start, they're not going to have the defending champion back. Howells Dodge is in D2 this year. You're going to have a new champ in that class. Cross County is going to be a contender there after finishing state runner-up last year. North Platte St. Pat's, who we've had number one in the rankings all season, assuming they win Thursday night, is going to be the top overall seed in that round of 16. But there's teams like Stanton that are unbeaten. There's just a lot of different ways I think that class can go. What does EMF look like? What does Elmwood Murdoch look like? There's no shortage of teams that can make a run in that class. And it's kind of the same in D2. Like we said, Howells Dodge is in D2 now. They're unbeaten. They're the favorite. There's no doubt about that.
Sure.
They're the favorite every year, no matter what class they're in.
Exactly.
But again, you look at a team like Hitchcock County out west, who's 8-0 and has just been smashing teams out there. How do they kind of match up? You look at, I'm going to grab the bracket here, so it's right in front of me. You look at teams like BDS, who's been right there for the last decade or more. You look at teams like Ainsworth, 8-0 for the first time in forever. First winning season since the early 90s. They've got a Power 5 recruit on their roster, which not a lot of 8-man teams have. And Carter Nelson. What are they going to look like? Kennesaw is the defending D2 champ, and they're a 6 seed in the West bracket. They're 7-1. I think that just kind of shows you how wide open this class is. Sandhill Stedford 7-1. In the playoffs. They're the 2 seed out west. So it's always fascinating to me this time of year. Obviously, this first week, you're going to see a lot of the favorites win, a lot of the higher seeds win, and probably win big. But I think after that, when you get into that statewide seeding and you kind of see those cross-state matchups with teams that aren't familiar with each other, in D1 and in D2, you're going to maybe see a little bit of chaos. And I say that in the watch. It's going to be Howells Dodge and Sandhill Stedford in D2, and it's going to be whoever in Cross County and somebody in D1. But that's the fun part. You don't know for sure. And all those games start Thursday night, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I find interesting every year about the 8-man playoffs is you can have a 6, 7, 8 team that's 8-0 or 7-1.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, how did they get to this position? How have they won so many games? And that's why I like the format where the second week of the playoffs, you might have 2 undefeated teams playing each other. Yeah. And then the next week, you might have 2 more undefeated teams playing each other. It's just a really interesting way that they've set this up to where, a lot of it's because they, like you said, they're unfamiliar. They haven't played each other. Travel with how many schools there are is nearly impossible, it seems like at times. But you say chaos, but it's almost like it's kind of bringing the powers from each side of the state to finally meet up.
Yeah, it's you mentioned the unbeaten teams, and there's a handful of those in D1 and in D2, and then you look at the 7-1 teams, and there's like 11 in one class and a bunch more in the other. So it's no shortage of really, really good teams. And really, really good resumes. And I think that's what makes these brackets so interesting is, like you said, you're going to get those unbeaten matchups, those one-loss matchups in just about every round all the way through. And so, again, a lot of fun. Yeah, it's the best time of year. It's probably my favorite thing to cover on the sports calendar because everything we've talked about, the weather, the teams, the great games, the things like that. So should be a lot of fun, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see how it shakes out. Again, D1, D2 start this week. Everybody else joins them next week. A, B, C1, C2, 6-man start next week. And then it'll be nice because everything will be in sync. It'll all be on Fridays this year, all the way through the semifinals, and then the finals week of Thanksgiving, that Monday and Tuesday over at Memorial Stadium. 6-man final November 18th in Kearney, and so it's fun. It's the fun time of year. And the playoffs are fun, but as you said, the regular season's not over yet for a lot of these schools, and that's kind of what we're looking at with obviously all the Lincoln teams and a lot of the teams in the area.
Yeah, and before we get to that last week of the regular season, you look at Thursday night. Is there a D1 or D2 game, or maybe one in each class that jumps out as maybe the most interesting matchup? I know a lot of times you look at the 116, it's kind of like, we have an idea of how this is going to go.
Yeah.
But you get to those, middle games, and that's where it can kind of get interesting.
I think Elmwood Murdoch and Plainview has a chance to be interesting. That's Elmwood Murdoch's the 6th seed in the D1 East bracket. Plainview's the 11th seed at 5-3. And again, Elmwood Murdoch is kind of done with what we expected them to do. They had that surprising win in week 1 over St. Pat's, over Fall City Sacred Heart, where they scored 95 points.
Yeah.
And they've kind of rolled, but you look at the teams that Elmwood Murdoch has played that are 4-4, 5-3, 6-2. They haven't been walkovers, and so Plainview's got a pretty good drive to get down to Elmwood Thursday night. I think that's a game you kind of keep half an eye on. Again, it's so tough to tell with these first round matchups because you're going to see some mismatches. That's just how it is. But I think that's a game to keep an eye on. I think Heartland, EMF, Exeter Milligan Friend in that 8-9 game is one to watch. Those are, of course, the games you're always going to watch because it's the two closest seeds. And speaking of 8-9, how about Humphrey St. Francis and Fall City Sacred Heart in D2 in a first round matchup? Those two teams are used to playing in the playoffs. Usually not in the first round. So one of those teams is going to go home early for the first time in a long time. I think that's going to be a really interesting game to watch. One of those classic afternoon playoff games with the sun still out. That'll be a lot of fun up in Humphrey for sure. And then you kind of go down the rest of that bracket, and Lord Central Catholic is a team that made a really good run last year. They're playing Lawrence Nelson, who's kind of been a little bit of a surprise at 7-1. I think that's a game to kind of keep an eye on. Does Lawrence Nelson kind of take that first step towards what could be a good run for them? Yep. So again, there's mismatches in these games. We all know that, but there's also going to be a handful of games that are going to be close. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. And now kind of wrap up the regular season here with 11-man and 6-man. Last week talked about wasn't a great slate. Had some okay games. This week's slate, it's all right.
It's all right.
Right?
It's all right. And we kind of talked about it, right? Like you're to that point in the year where the team that's favored is probably going to win.
Exactly.
For the most part. You're either playing something for this at this point or you're not.
You're right.
And you see that in some of these games. We're going to see it again, I think this weekend. You kind of start looking at the playoff picture and the projections, and you kind of start to have a pretty good idea who's going to be in, who's out, who's on the bubble. And, in the city, it looks like Lincoln East and Lincoln Southwest are both in at this point. Not that they don't want to go win on Friday night. Southwest, I think, has a really interesting game against Millard North, coming off that heartbreaker against Millard West last week, where Millard West connected on a pass with under a minute to go, a 69-yard touchdown pass to win the game. And you saw a good effort by Cal Newell, the Southwest running back, go for out, set a school record for rushing yards, 36 for 268, I think is what he ended up with. So great game by him. Went for naught. Can they kind of bounce back against a Millard North team that's young but has a lot of talent? And can Southwest win that game and kind of solidify, potentially a top 8 seed in a home game going into next week? I think that's kind of the big thing for Southwest right now. If you lose that game, you're probably going on the road right back to Omaha the week after. If you win it, and depending on how some other things fall, maybe you get that home game at Seacrest on Friday. So there's something to play for there. And, I look at Lincoln Southeast, too, a team that's kind of on the bubble. Couple close losses this year, tough losses. They play at South Sioux City Friday night. That's a team that's 2-6. So you figure Southeast is going to be favored there. Can they win that game and get the help they need to get in and get three Lincoln teams into the Class A playoffs? So there's some intrigue there, no doubt. Especially with the Class A schools. It's kind of the three we thought it would be at the beginning of the year as far as who would be, postseason candidates and things like that. So we've got two of them. In Southeast, get the win, take care of business Friday night, and make it 3. I think that's kind of the big thing in Class A.
Yeah, and you look at Lincoln East traveling up to Gretna, number 1 Gretna.
Yeah, couple big-time athletes in that game.
Yeah,
quarterback,
certainly.
receiver.
Yeah, you look at that game, and it's interesting for East because obviously, like you said, they're in, but you don't want to go up there and not, you want to show something.
Yeah, you want to show well.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you're Gretna, you're in a position where you don't want to. Not that they'll host. They're going to host a playoff game. We know that for sure. But you don't want to lose any momentum either. So you don't want to go in. You don't want anybody to get hurt, anything like that. But at the same time, like you don't want to kind of just walk through that game either. And maybe Lincoln East can jump up and catch them if Gretna tries to kind of sleepwalk their way through it.
I think Lincoln East is good enough defensively to make it interesting. Can the offense keep up? Gretna, what they have in Zane Flores and that receiver core and up front. They've scored on everybody this year. It hasn't mattered who they've played. It hasn't mattered how much time has been left in the games they've played. You look at the Bellevue West game and what they did in that game. So they're going to score points, the Dragons are. Can East find a way to limit that? Can they keep them to 24 or 30? Somewhere in there, and at least make it interesting going into the second half. Maybe make Gretna keep Zane Flores in that game a little longer than they want to. Maybe make them work a little harder than they want to. East can do that, I think, talent-wise with what they have on defense. Can they be productive enough on offense? If you do hold Gretna to 24, can you score right there with them? I think that's kind of the magic number for East. If they can keep it in that 24-point range, they're going to have a chance, I think, in that game.
Yeah, looking at a couple other Lincoln schools, you've got Christian hosting Syracuse on Friday. You've got Lincoln Lutheran going to Milford. Two other teams that are, I would say Lutheran's probably in at this point pretty comfortably. Christian kind of a little back and forth after that. Of course, they opened the season with a big win over Lutheran. Yeah. And then, they've had some ups and downs, but they've overall played pretty solid football this season.
Yeah, coming off a rough year last year, and I've had a really nice year this year. And they host Syracuse, like you said, Friday night. That's a 5-3 team, so it's no pushover. There's not a 1-7, 0-8 coming in here where we win this and we're in. You're going to have to work for it.
Yeah,
Friday night, and they are still alive for one of those at-large spots. Doesn't look like they're going to win the district. That's a tough district they're in with Wilbur, Claytonia, Malcolm, of course, unbeaten.
Yeah,
teams like that. So. That's a game where you need to win, and you need Malcolm to take care of business, win that district title. They're playing Wilbur Claytonia this week, so a Malcolm win there really helps you if you're Lincoln Christian because you're kind of fighting with Wilbur Claytonia for one of those playoff spots. So same for Lincoln Lutheran. I don't think it's a guarantee they're in. You got to go take care of business. Win the game is what it comes down to. If you win the game, you've done what you can. You've put yourself in the best position you can to be in the playoffs. And I think Lutheran showed in that Malcolm game, they can stay with quality teams. They lost the game 51-34. They were up 14-0 in that game right out of the gate on the road. So that Lutheran has the talent, especially offensively, to scare some teams if they do get into the postseason. But again, you got to go do it on Friday night. Win that game. Chips are going to fall where they may. You've done all you can at that point. It's kind of the control, what you can control type situation that you hear so much. So that's kind of where it's at for Lincoln Lutheran. They've just got to go take care of business in that game.
Yeah, and then Parkview Christian neutral site with Lewiston playing at Sterling, so they can play under the lights. Parkview Christian's just taking care of business after their one. They had one close loss. Again, I know we always come back to it. They had a key injury in the game. That's kind of where the game turned. After that, pretty much played lights out the rest of the year.
Kind of what we expected from them.
Exactly.
I think there's no doubt about that. And this is a game where, again, you want to just keep momentum. You're in if you're Parkview Christian. You know that.
Yeah.
And so you want to play well, get through it healthy, keep your momentum going into the into the postseason because, again, we've harped on it all year. Parkview Christian's really good. They're probably a semifinal caliber team, but eventually you're going to run into the Potter Dixes, the Cody Kilgores, the SEMs of the world again at some point. So you just want to keep that momentum going and play well, get through Friday night healthy, put that game away early if you can, and get ready for next week.
Then looking around the rest of the area in the state, is there really a game that jumps out to you as maybe like, hey, this could actually shake up the playoff outlook? I know, again, we're kind of at that point of the year where it's like, we know who's there. Maybe someone jumps up to be a 16 or a 15, but is there anything that's maybe notable to you of like, hey, this is a game you might want to keep your eye on Friday?
Not necessarily a game to keep an eye on, but you look at Wahoo Newman playing David City Aquinas. Aquinas looks like they're going to miss the playoffs for the first time since 2000, 21-year streak, and that just speaks to the excellence of that program under Ron Mimick and how great they've been. So you give credit to Aquinas for what they were able to do. After that, it's interesting. You look at what's left in C2. Wilbur Claytonia, as we mentioned, playing Malcolm. If the Wolverines could win that game, they probably get in. It's kind of a win and you're in scenario. They lose it, depending on what happens around the state, it's going to be tough. And that's a team that we've seen make runs in the postseason in recent years. As far as area teams in Class B, it's Pius and Norris, both 4-4. You think, oh, they're both fighting for a spot. Winner gets it. Looks like they're both in right now, win or lose. So that game is a game where you want to be 5-4 going into the playoffs. You want to have that momentum, beat a quality team. Waverly is in. We've known that for a while. They've had a great year. C1, Ashton Greenwood, same thing. They're in. Can they just kind of continue, get through this last game, get to the postseason? So. There's nothing, at least area-wise, where you look at it and go, man, this is a huge game for, one of the teams that's close to Lincoln. Everybody kind of knows where it's at for them. They know whether they're in or out. There's a few teams out there that don't. But again, you've got to win games and you may get in. And if you do that, does it shake up what the brackets look like? Maybe not a whole lot, but it does guarantee you get to play one more week at least.
Yeah, before we go, Chris, big shout out to Lincoln East boys tennis.
Absolutely.
Team title, 4 individual titles. First Class A school to ever go undefeated in all 4 divisions.
Amazing.
It's quite literally unheard of, but it doesn't seem, it just feels impossible.
You hear it, and even talking about it now, and I think the final record was something like 174-0 in their matches, and you hear that, it doesn't register because it's just such an absurd number, and to do it at the highest level in Nebraska, where you're playing the top competition week in, week out, day in, day out. They go down to state and they lose one set at state, and that was in the number 1 singles title match. And by your freshman, who, by the way, came back and won the state title in a 3-set win. So, you have to give a ton of credit to the Spartans. That's an incredible run. That's something that, like you said, has never happened, may not happen again for a long, long time. When you don't know. So you have to kind of cherish those moments and savor those historic moments when you get them. And for Lincoln, that's certainly something historic.
All right. Well, we will be geared up. Playoff football this week. We'll be back to talk more playoff football when everybody is done with the regular season. We'll have it all lined up, all synced up, and we will catch up with the 11-man and 6-man next week. For Chris Basnett, I'm Colton Stone. This has been the Prep Extra Podcast.